Incest, consensual cannibalism, tricking a king into eating his own children. Sure, you might know the usual Norse myths, but these deep cuts were most likely left out of your high school curriculum. We're starting this list off with a myth that concerns an infamous trickster god who's been quite present in pop culture for a while now.
Me, I presume.
The gods of Asgard were often at war, and they needed a wall to surround Asgard and keep invaders out. They were approached by a mysterious builder with a strange offer. The builder would try to build a wall in just a few short months, but if he succeeded, the gods had to give him the sun and the moon. Oh, and Freyja, the goddess of love and death, had to marry him. Loki convinced the other gods to agree, believing that there was no way the builder could win such a challenge. What Loki didn't know was that the builder had a magic horse. The builder's stallion was enormous, and it was able to easily haul stones for the wall. Soon it became obvious that the builder was going to make the deadline, and the gods would have to pay him after all. The furious gods threatened to kill Loki if they lost the wager. As a last resort, the trickster god used his magic to transform into a beautiful mare and lure the stallion away. Without his horse, the builder couldn't finish the wall, and the gods won their bargain. While Freyja did not have to marry the builder, Loki did have to mate with the horse. Afterward, he vanished for several months. When he returned, he brought back an 8-legged foal, which he had given birth to himself. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Loki made this list twice, and this time for an even stranger reason. The giant Atli was a terrifying enemy of the gods, but not as terrifying as his daughter Skadi. As recorded in Skaldskaparmal from Snorri Sturluson's prose Edda, the gods were able to kill Atli, but when his daughter put on his helmet and took up his weapons, the gods immediately called for a truce. They agreed to give her many things, including any of the gods for a husband and transforming her dead father's eyes into stars. But the hardest thing she demanded was a simple one. To avoid a war, they had to make Skadi laugh. Skadi included this condition because, as she also happened to be grieving, she thought it would be impossible. Although the task seemed futile, Loki figured out the one thing that would make the warrior giantess laugh: watching someone else endure a great amount of pain. He presented Skadi with a billy goat with a rope tied around its beard and tied the other end around his private parts, and he startled the goat. As the goat ran, the rope became taut, yanking both the goat's beard and Loki's genitals. Both Loki and the goat shrieked in pain as the animal attempted to break free. Loki finally collapsed in front of Skadi, but only when she was roaring with laughter. In Norse mythology, the first being that ever lived was the giant Ymir, and his body would eventually become the world, quite literally and in gruesome fashion. According to legend, Ymir was fed by the milk of a primeval cow, and this cow survived by licking salty rocks. One of these stones, carved by the cow's tongue, became Buri, grandfather of Odin and his two brothers, Vili and Ve. Odin and his brothers killed Ymir, and the blood that flowed from his corpse became a massive flood which drowned almost every other being before settling into lakes and rivers. Not stopping there, Odin used Ymir's bones to build mountains, his body to make the earth, and his teeth to make rocks. The inside of Ymir's skull became the sky, and his brain, blown to pieces, became clouds. This gory corpse made a beautiful world, but soon maggots emerged from the rotting flesh. Odin granted these maggots wisdom, and they became the first dwarves. One of the most influential events in Norse mythology is the murder of the god Baldur, who was Odin's son and beloved by all the gods, except for Loki. The first thing Odin did after his son's death was to visit a seer to learn about the future. The seer assured Odin that Baldur would be avenged, but they also told him that the man who would do it was not born yet. However, the seer predicted that the mother of Baldur's avenger was a princess named Rin. Immediately, Odin swore that he would get her pregnant with the son who would avenge Baldur's death. First, Odin transformed himself into a soldier in her father's army and tried to seduce her, but Rin was not interested. Odin tried again in different disguises, but every time Rin said no. Finally, he used ancient runes to make her seem like she was unwell, then took on the form of a woman healer who claimed to have a medicine that could cure her, but that Rin would have to be tied up to take it. When Odin was alone with her, he sexually assaulted her. As described in John Lindau's Norse Mythology, this story was likely always seen as disgusting and shameful, particularly because Odin had disguised himself as a woman, and the use of magic by men was already considered unnatural. In some versions of the story, the other gods banished Odin for a decade for his crimes. In the saga of the Volsungs, there was a widowed queen named Gudrun, who was betrothed to a king named Atli. Gudrun tried desperately to avoid the match because she had received a prophecy that the marriage would bring nothing but grief, but she was still forced to go through with it. They had 2 sons together, but soon she learned that she was right to refuse the marriage. King Atli was planning to betray her family and kill her brothers. Atli set a trap, and when Gudrun's brothers arrived, her husband immediately had his men attack them. Gudrun was a warrior queen and fought bravely against her husband to save her brothers, but in the end, they were defeated. King Atli killed both of Gudrun's brothers, one by cutting out his heart and the other by throwing him into a snake pit. Afterward, Gudrun submitted to her husband, telling him that she would always be faithful to him because he had defeated her family in battle. Unbeknownst to him, she was plotting a horrendous revenge. That night, King Atli asked for a magnificent feast to celebrate defeating his wife's brothers, and Gudrun prepared the meal for him. He ate voraciously and was very pleased with food, until Gudrun revealed that she had killed both of their children and served their hearts to their father. Soon after, she burned Atli's halls to the ground with him and all his men inside. Kinda makes you wonder if Cartman took inspiration from this tale when he took revenge on Scott Tenorman and tricked him into eating his own parents.
Oh, the tears of unfathomable sadness. Yummy, yummy, you guys.
Freyja, often depicted riding a pig or in a chariot pulled by cats, is among the most famous of the Norse gods. In addition to being the goddess of death and war, she is often linked to other love and fertility goddesses like the Egyptian Isis and the Greek Aphrodite, and some myths about these goddesses are very similar. However, the story of her birth is highly unusual. Unlike Isis, who was born from a union of the earth and the sky, or Aphrodite, who burst fully formed out of the ocean, Freyja is likely the product of incest. Many of the gods in popular Norse myths, like Odin, Balder, Thor, and Loki, are known as the warrior Aesir gods. As described in Snorri Sturluson's Heimskringla, the Aesir gods considered incest a terrible taboo and never had relationships with their siblings. However, there was another group of gods known as the Vanir gods, and the Vanir gods always had incestuous relationships. Freyja's father, the sea god Njord, was also a Vanir, and he was married to his own sister. When the thunder god Thor traveled the 9 realms fighting giants and trolls, he often got around using a chariot pulled by a pair of goats. He named his goats Gaptooth and Toothgrinder, and they pulled him everywhere he needed to go. However, when Thor got hungry, he would turn on the animals, as described in Gylfagunning. First, Thor would slit his goats' throats, then flay them, and finally boil their flesh into stew. Overnight, Thor would wrap Gaptooth and Toothgrinder's bones up in their flayed skin. Then, in the morning, his goats would be alive again, ready to work. Gaptooth and Toothgrinder are not the only animals that were killed, eaten, resurrected, and killed again in Norse mythology. As recounted in John Lindau's Norse Mythology, in the afterlife, dead warriors have had nothing but pork, and all the meat comes from a single pig named Sarimnir. Each morning, the pig is boiled into a stew, and then in the evening, he returns to life, only to be eaten again the following day.
Oh, that is disgusting.
According to legend, Odin brought humans to life while his brothers shaped their bodies and gave them reason. Compared to their more famous sibling, Odin's brothers Ve and Vili are not particularly important gods in the Norse myths that have survived. But while there are a few other stories about Odin's brothers, there is one notable tale that is recounted in Heimskringla. Both Ve and Vili hooked up with Odin's wife. Odin was known to roam the world, and while he was away, his brothers Ve and Vili ruled in his stead. However, on one occasion, he was gone so long that his fellow gods began to suspect that he was never coming back. Assuming he was dead or had abandoned his role as king of the gods, Ve and Vili began dividing up everything Odin owned between them. To top it all off, Odin's wife, Frigg, started having sex with both of her husband's brothers, at least until Odin returned to reclaim the throne, his things, and his wife. One possible interpretation of why Ve and Vili felt so entitled to Odin's things and why Frigg would so quickly start sleeping with them while her husband was away is that they are not really Odin's brothers. Some academics note that Ve and Vili are hypostases of Odin, or all different forms of the same god. Many of the Norse myths include murder and revenge, but few are as disturbing as the story of Princess Signy. As folklorist D.L. Ashleyman describes in his English language summary of the Saga of the Volsungs, the king of Hundland had 11 children, and the oldest were twins named Sigmund and Signy. King Siggeir of Gautland wanted Signy to be his wife, and while she despised Siggeir, her father forced her to marry him. Despite their union, the kingdoms of Gautland and Hundland were soon at war, and Siggeir killed Signy's father and all of her brothers except Signy's twin Sigmund. King Siggeir and Signy had 2 sons, and Signy attempted to train both to kill their father. To make them tougher, she regularly subjected the children to hideous tortures, like stitching their clothes to their body. When her sons failed her test, Signy ordered her twin brother Sigmund to kill them. She decided that the problem with her children was her husband, and that if she wanted a strong son, she would have to find a stronger father. Signy decided that the only man strong enough was her own twin, but knew that he would not willingly get her pregnant, so she used magic to transform into the shape of another woman and seduced him, tricking him into incest. She had a son, and this one passed her cruel test. The child would go on to burn King Siggeir's hall with both him and Signy inside.
Oh my god.
Cannibalism was often considered the ultimate taboo, but in some myths it's depicted as a way of becoming wiser, healthier, or more powerful. As described by medieval food and magic scholar Andrea Marashi, for medievalists, some Norse tales describe how when somebody ate another person's flesh, they would acquire specific virtues from them. In one Icelandic saga, an earl is jealous of the magical abilities of a rival soothsayer, so he kills him and eats his heart to steal his power. In many accounts, though, people aren't eating their rivals, they're eating their family. According to the Journal of English and Germanic Philology, many Norse myths depict a person eating relatives. In some, like the story of Loki's wolf child Fenrir eating the god of justice's hand or the hero Sigurd eating his dragon uncle's heart, the cannibalism is diluted by the fact that some of the characters look like monsters and are already in conflict for other reasons. However, this is not always the case. In one story involving two human brothers, the cannibalism is actually consensual. A man called Freyja mistakes his brother for an intruder, and the two briefly fight. After realizing his mistake, Freyja is disturbed by how easy it was to overpower his brother, and feeds him some of his own blood. After the gory ritual, Freyja's brother is significantly stronger for it.